My name is Olivia Hart. I am 31 years old and I live in a small shared room at a disability support center in Columbus, Ohio. Outside the window, it is raining. The steady tapping of the drops against the glass is oddly rhythmic, like a metronome counting out each memory I have spent years trying to bury. But no matter how far I push them down, they come back. They always come back. I am not rich. I do not have a luxury car or a penthouse or even a savings account that gives me comfort. What I do have is something far heavier than wealth. I carry a past that still burns every time I breathe. Some people write books to tell their story. Me, I sit here in a creaky old wheelchair with rusted wheels and tell mine to anyone who will listen. Not because I want pity, not because I crave attention, but because silence almost killed me. I was not always like this. I was once a girl who believed in fairy tales. A girl who climbed trees in worn-out sneakers and thought her parents were heroes. A girl who had dreams that stretched far beyond the mold-stained ceiling of our tiny apartment in Dayton. I didn't know then that dreams could rot from the inside when trust is broken. That love, if sold for a price, turns poisonous. I didn't know that at 8 years old, my life would be taken from me not with a gun, not with violence, but with a signature on a contract and a lie whispered with a kiss on the forehead. I want to believe that people are good, that family means protection. But when your own mother leads you into a building and watches while strangers inject something into your neck, everything you thought was true becomes suspect. I didn't understand the betrayal then. I only knew that my legs stopped working weeks later. I only knew that when I cried in bed, my parents stopped coming to check on me. My name is Olivia. I was their daughter, and I became the burden they wanted to erase. Years passed. The world kept spinning. My body stayed still, and my soul, piece by piece, shattered. But what no one expected, what even I didn't expect, was that from the ashes of that shattered girl, someone else would emerge. Someone determined, someone angry, someone who would no longer ask for love, but demand justice. You see, this isn't just a story of suffering. This is a story of truth, of darkness pulled into light, of a daughter once discarded rising up to expose everything that was done to her. Some stories begin with joy and end in pain. Mine begins in the ruins and crawls its way toward light. It begins with rain, a wheelchair, and a woman the world tried to forget. But I remember everything. Every lie, every silent dinner, every time my mother looked away, every time my father called me the wrong daughter. And most of all, I remember one Thanksgiving night when they stood in front of friends and family and declared me a burden. That night changed everything. That was the last time I sat at their table, the last time I waited for affection, the last time I accepted their silence. This is the story of what happened next. The investigation, the letter, the secrets, the courtroom, and the verdict that shook more than just my family. I tell it now not because I want revenge, but because someone needs to know that monsters don't always hide under beds. Sometimes they kiss you goodnight, and sometimes they sell you for $30,000 and call it love. I was 8, I trusted them, and they sold me. My name is Olivia Hart, and this is the story of the burden they tried to silence. I was born in a forgotten corner of Dayton, Ohio, in a place where broken sidewalks and rusted mailboxes were part of the landscape. Our apartment had 2 rooms, one of which was barely large enough to fit a twin mattress and a chipped dresser. The walls were stained with years of dampness and smoke, and the windows rattled every time the wind blew too hard. My mother, Helen, worked long shifts at a diner on Main Street, the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like burnt rubber. She wore tired eyes and a forced smile, coming home with her feet swollen and her hands smelling like grease. My father, Bruce, worked in a welding shop that reeked of metal and sweat. He came home each evening with oil-streaked jeans, a thermos under one arm, and silence hanging from his shoulders. They were tired, always tired, and we were always broke. I learned early not to ask for too much. New shoes meant someone had skipped a meal. Birthday gifts were usually secondhand wrapped in newspaper. I didn't complain. I wasn't ungrateful. I knew they tried, and in those early years I loved them with the fierce, blind trust that only children have. Despite everything, I found ways to create joy. My favorite place was under the crooked maple tree in the back alley where I would sit with a notebook and write fairy tales about girls who lived in castles and flew with dragons. I had one friend, Maya, a girl with frizzy hair and a laugh that made the world feel warmer. We would sit together on milk crates and dream of escaping the neighborhood. One day we said we'd go somewhere with clean streets and bookstores and a sky that didn't smell like exhaust. Back then, I thought dreams could be built out of hope alone. I didn't know that hope, when left unguarded, could be the very thing that gets stolen. My parents didn't talk much about the future. There was always too much to do in the present, bills to pay, leaks to fix, shifts to survive. I thought the silence meant contentment. I thought they were just too tired to dream. I didn't know they were planning something else entirely, something that would shatter every notion I had of love and safety. When I think about those early days now, I see a child wrapped in illusions, sitting at a plastic kitchen table, coloring in library books, while her parents whispered behind closed doors. I remember the smell of boiled cabbage, the sound of the floor creaking when my father paced in the hallway, the way my mother's voice would tremble whenever I asked why we didn't go on trips like other families. And yet I didn't question them. Not really. They were my parents. I thought that was enough. I thought being their daughter meant I was safe. I didn't know the value of my body to someone else. I didn't know that there are people who look at children and see only opportunity. If I had known what was coming, I might have paid more attention to the way they started acting strange around the time I turned 8. The sudden quiet, the lingering glances, the way my father would look at the calendar and mutter to himself. But I didn't. I was busy drawing unicorns, busy believing that if I loved them hard enough, they'd love me back forever. The child I was could never have imagined what they were planning. She was too busy trying to be enough. The morning it all changed started like any other, cold gray and filled with the smell of instant oatmeal. I was 8, still wearing hand-me-down pajamas with faded cartoon bears and sitting at the kitchen table doodling on a paper napkin. My mother was unusually quiet, her eyes darting between me and the clock. My father, who usually left early for work, stood by the door as if waiting for something. Then she said it. "Olivia, no school today. We're taking you for a health checkup." Her voice was calm, but her hands trembled as she stirred her coffee. I blinked. A checkup. But I wasn't sick. I said so. My father cut in. "Don't ask too many questions. Let's go." That was the beginning. That was the moment my world took a turn I never saw coming. We got into our old sedan. I remember the back seat smelled like gasoline in winter. The drive was long through neighborhoods I didn't recognize, past empty fields and silent warehouses. Eventually, we stopped in front of a squat gray building with no signs, just a heavy steel door and a small parking lot with only 2 cars. It didn't look like a hospital. It didn't look like anything. I reached for my mother's hand and she squeezed it, once her palm cold and damp. "Don't be scared," she whispered, but she was the one shaking. Inside, the air was sterile and sharp. A man in a white lab coat met us at the desk. He had kind eyes, but a smile that didn't touch them. "Dr. Whitner," he introduced himself. He patted my shoulder. "Just a quick few tests, sweetheart. You'll be out in no time." I followed him down a hallway lined with closed doors. My parents stayed behind. That should have told me something. But I was a child, too trusting, too small to see the shadows around me. The room was white. Walls, floor, ceiling white. A cold metal table sat in the center with straps I didn't understand. "Lie down, please." I did as told. One needle, then another, one in my arm, one near my neck. The second one burned. Then everything blurred. I remember a bright light overhead, a buzzing sound, then nothing. When I woke up, I was in my bed back home. My mother sat beside me, stroking my hair. "You're fine," she said softly, but she didn't look me in the eye. I asked what happened. She smiled and said, "Just a checkup. Don't worry about it." But I did worry. I couldn't explain it, but something in me had changed. A heaviness, a disconnect. Over the next few weeks, my legs began to ache. At first, it was a tingling sensation. Then, sharp stabbing pains. Then, one morning, I tried to get out of bed and collapsed. I cried. My father rushed in and looked at me like I was a broken appliance. He didn't comfort me. He just muttered, "Why weren't you more careful?" Doctors at a nearby clinic examined me. They said I had some rare neurological condition. There was no clear explanation. No blood tests, no MRIs, just a label, a mystery, and silence. My parents didn't seek further treatment. They didn't ask for a second opinion. Instead, they bought me a second-hand wheelchair that squeaked and wobbled. They said it was temporary, that I'd get better, but they stopped taking me to appointments, stopped asking if I felt pain, stopped treating me like a child and more like a task to be managed. The pain in my legs became permanent. The wheelchair became my world. And slowly, the house changed too. We got a new car, then a new couch, then out of nowhere my parents said we were moving to a better place, a new start. I thought maybe they were doing it for me. But the house we moved into was a suburban dream. Large, clean, white fences, polished countertops, a fireplace I wasn't allowed to use. I didn't fit in, not just because of the wheelchair, but because the warmth I'd known, however small, had vanished. My father smiled more, but only when talking about money. My mother wore nicer clothes, but stopped hugging me. I started to feel like furniture, something to be cleaned around, ignored. When I asked how we could afford such a house, my father said business was better now. I knew better than to ask further. I saw the envelopes they tried to hide, the bank statements, the locked drawers. I heard the late-night phone calls in hushed voices. I didn't know what was happening. I just knew that whatever they'd done, it had cost me my legs. After we moved into the new house in Upper Arlington, nothing felt familiar anymore. The air smelled like freshly mowed grass and expensive laundry detergent. The neighbors waved politely. The sidewalks were clean, but inside the house, the coldness was sharper than ever. My new room was larger but empty, sterile. Like no one expected me to be there long. My parents didn't decorate it. No posters, no warm colors, just plain beige walls and a single twin bed shoved against the far wall. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like storage. I tried to pretend it was okay. I tried to tell myself that maybe, just maybe, things would get better here. But they didn't. My parents avoided me more than before. At dinner, they spoke to each other in low tones about things I didn't understand. Mortgage options, investment returns, mutual funds. Words that had never been part of our lives before. I sat at the end of the table, often in silence, pushing food around my plate. If I asked a question, they ignored me. If I insisted, my father would slam his fork down and say, "Why do you always need to make things harder?" I stopped asking. I stopped speaking. I watched. I listened. And I remembered. The envelopes came often, thick, marked with names I didn't recognize: Gene Farm, Medical Holdings, BRC Research. They stuffed them into drawers quickly, as if they burned to touch. My mother started wearing a gold necklace she never explained. My father bought a watch with a face that glinted under every light. We went from dollar store groceries to imported snacks, but none of it ever touched my world. My wheelchair remained broken, squeaking louder every week. My clothes were still from the clearance rack. My school bag was the same one I had since 3rd grade. I became invisible in a house that gleamed like a magazine cover. Then came the whispers. Late at night, I would hear them arguing. My room was across the hall from their bedroom. The walls were thin. I wasn't supposed to hear anything, but I did. "You said it would be," once my mother hissed. And it was, my father snapped. "We needed the money. We still do. She's already done. What more do you want?" Done. That word echoed through me. What did it mean to be done? Was I a task completed? A transaction closed? I began to suspect something deeper, something darker. I remembered the clinic, the needles, the doctor with the empty smile. But every time I tried to bring it up, my parents shut me down. One afternoon, while looking for a pen in my father's study, I opened a drawer and found a folder with the words, "Clinical Consent, Private." Before I could flip through it, my father stormed in and grabbed it from my hands. "Don't ever touch my things again," he growled. "I'm not kidding, Olivia." That night, I cried silently into my pillow, not because I was scared, but because something inside me had started to unravel. A voice that had been silent for years began to speak. "Something happened to me, and they know, and they're hiding it." I started writing things down, times, words, names on envelopes, but I was just a kid in a wheelchair with no power and no one who believed me. And my parents, they lived like nothing had ever gone wrong, like the daughter who used to laugh in the tire piles back in Dayton had never existed. I was 10 when my mother announced she was pregnant. She made the announcement at breakfast one Sunday, her voice bright and artificial like the commercials that played between cartoons. "Isn't it wonderful news, Olivia? You'll be a big sister." I smiled politely, said, "Congratulations," and rolled myself back to my room. But deep down, I felt something twist inside me. I wanted to be happy. I wanted to believe this would bring us closer. Maybe a new baby would soften the sharpness that had overtaken our house. Maybe I would no longer be invisible. Maybe they would remember how to love. When Lucas was born, the house transformed again, but this time not in bricks or marble. It transformed in energy, in attention, in where the warmth went. All of it went to him. Lucas had blue eyes and soft, golden curls. He giggled often and cried rarely. My mother called him her little angel. My father bounced him on his knee and said he'd be the pride of the family. At first, I adored him too. I would read to him in my wheelchair, letting him grab at the corners of picture books. I would sing lullabies to him at night while my mother washed dishes. But soon, I started noticing things. They stopped asking me to join family outings. When they went to the zoo, I was told, "Sorry, Olivia, it would be too difficult with your chair." When they went to the park, I was left with a sandwich and a warning to behave. Pictures of Lucas flooded the walls. Every surface had a frame with his smile. Meanwhile, the few photos of me from years ago vanished, replaced by his giggling face and tiny hands. One day, I asked my mother why she hadn't taken me along to Lucas's birthday picnic. Her smile disappeared. She turned to me and said coldly, "Because you complicate things." That sentence stayed with me. It echoed in my mind whenever I saw them laughing without me. I began to feel like a ghost trapped in a body that no one wanted to see. When relatives visited, they cooed over Lucas. "Oh, he's so clever. He's so handsome. He'll go far." They rarely acknowledged me, and if they did, it was a glance followed by a quiet, "How's school, sweetie?" Then silence. My father once told someone over the phone, "We can't take risks anymore, not after what happened with the first one." The first one. That was me. I was no longer Olivia. I was the failed experiment, the reminder, the burden, the guilt they refused to carry, but still kept locked inside the walls. Lucas grew, and with every inch he gained, I felt like I shrank. He had birthday parties with pony rides. I had boxed cupcakes alone in my room. He had private tutors and music classes. I had a worn-out laptop and a broken printer. My mother started volunteering at his school. My father coached his soccer team. No one remembered that I used to draw pictures for the fridge, that I used to dream of being an artist. They never asked about my drawings again. They never asked anything. One night, I overheard my parents fighting in the living room again. "It's too risky to keep her around," my father said. "She's not a child anymore. She's going to start asking real questions." My mother responded, "Let her ask. She won't find anything. We've cleaned everything up." Then came silence, the kind of silence that fills a house and never leaves. From that night on, I stopped asking, but I started remembering, and most of all, I started watching. I was 17 the last time they let me sit at the main table. It was Thanksgiving, and for once the house was filled with people. Uncles, aunts, neighbors in tailored suits, women with painted nails and polite laughter. The smell of rosemary turkey and brown sugar ham floated through the halls like something out of a holiday magazine. It was the kind of meal people posted about online. Perfect, picturesque, and utterly false. I had spent the morning in my room as usual, listening to the clatter of dishes and the sound of Lucas running around the living room like the crown prince of a kingdom I no longer belonged to. At some point, my mother knocked. Her voice was smooth, overly sweet. "Olivia, come join us. It's a special day." I hesitated. It had been years since I was invited to anything. They didn't include me in birthdays or holidays or even casual dinners anymore. I was fed early and separately like an afterthought, but something in her tone felt rehearsed, like she needed me there for a reason. I wheeled myself out of my room, heart pounding. I told myself not to hope, but I hoped anyway. The dining room was aglow with candlelight and crystal glasses. The table was draped in white linen set with gold utensils and neatly folded napkins. Lucas sat at the center wearing a navy blue blazer and beaming. My mother placed a hand on his shoulder like he was a trophy. I found a spot at the far end of the table near the corner where no one made eye contact. A few people gave me brief, strained smiles before returning to their conversations. I kept my eyes on my plate, picking at green beans and mashed potatoes. My parents were unusually animated. My mother laughed at everything my father said. My father stood and raised a glass. He cleared his throat. "Thank you all for being here. This has been a beautiful year for our family." I couldn't help but flinch at the word family. He continued, "Thanksgiving is a time to reflect on what we're grateful for, and we are most grateful for our son Lucas." He looked at Lucas like he had discovered gold. "Lucas has brought joy, hope, and pride into our lives. He is everything we ever dreamed of in a child." My chest tightened. I looked around. No one seemed surprised. My father's voice grew stronger. "Today, we want to make an announcement. We've decided that all of our family assets, our house, our savings, our shares, everything we own will go to Lucas. He is the future of this family." The room broke into applause. Some guests whistled. My mother kissed Lucas on the cheek. He giggled and clung to her arm, oblivious. I sat frozen. Every sound faded into a dull roar in my ears. The clapping, the laughter, the clink of glasses. I could barely breathe. I wasn't expecting to be rich. I didn't want the house. But I wanted something. Acknowledgement. Inclusion. Love. I looked up, trying to steady my voice. "What about me?" The words came out softer than I intended, but they cut through the room like glass. The laughter stopped. Every head turned toward me. My father's eyes darkened. My mother stiffened. My father let out a chuckle, but it wasn't warm. It was sharp. "Olivia, what about you? You've been a burden we've carried for 17 years. Too long if we're being honest." The gasp from one of the guests was audible. My face burned. My hands trembled. I looked to my mother, but she avoided my eyes. I looked at Lucas. He blinked, confused, still smiling faintly. The silence that followed was unbearable. No one defended me. No one spoke. The moment passed like a shadow swallowing the room. Then just like that, the laughter resumed. My question was erased. I wasn't there. I was nothing. I wheeled myself back to my room in silence, my stomach twisting not from hunger but from humiliation. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, the chandelier's light still burned into my memory. I listened to the sound of celebration continuing without me. I knew something had snapped inside me, something that had been clinging to the hope they would change. That night, I packed a bag, a few clothes, my notebooks, a water bottle, some cash I had hidden. At dawn, while the house still slept, I rolled myself out the back door and down the street. I didn't know where I was going. I only knew I was never coming back. The morning air was bitterly cold as I wheeled myself down the empty sidewalk, each push of my hands stinging with effort. I had nowhere to go, no destination, only a single thought echoing in my mind. I would not let them humiliate me one more day. The streets were quiet, dusted with frost, and the farther I got from the house, the lighter I felt. Not because I was free, but because I had finally acted. The bus station was nearly deserted. I used the little cash I had to buy a one-way ticket to Columbus, a city large enough to disappear in. I didn't cry. Not that day. I had already cried everything out during the years they had ignored me, belittled me, erased me. In Columbus, I found shelter at a disability support center on the outskirts of the city. It wasn't glamorous. Peeling paint, narrow hallways, old furniture. But it had a roof, a warm cot, and people who didn't look through me like I was a ghost. I told them I had nowhere to go. They didn't ask too many questions. Maybe they saw the pain in my eyes. Maybe they were too used to people like me drifting in with pasts they couldn't speak about. For the first time in years, I felt still. I didn't feel safe yet, but I felt like I could breathe. Days passed quietly. I spent my time reading old books in the community room or staring out the window at the gray sky. No one called me. No one from my family tried to find me. That didn't surprise me. I was used to being forgotten. One afternoon, as I returned from the library 2 blocks away, a staff member named Denise called my name. "Olivia, someone left this for you." She handed me an unmarked envelope. No name, no return address. Just my first name written in shaky handwriting. I took it, my fingers trembling. I wheeled myself to the corner of the common room, opened the envelope, and unfolded a single sheet of paper. There were only a few lines written in rushed ink. "You are not sick. You were never sick. Your parents sold you. You were a test subject. My child was one too. Investigate. No signature, no clue who wrote it, but the words sliced through me. My breath caught. I read it again. Again. My heart pounded like it was trying to escape my chest. I wanted to believe it was a cruel prank, a mistake, but something inside me whispered the truth. I had always known something was wrong. I had always felt it. The visit to the clinic, the white room, the needles, the way my legs gave out weeks later, my parents' sudden wealth, the way they avoided talking about my condition, the locked folders in my father's study, the strange names on the envelopes. Everything came flooding back. I couldn't move. I sat frozen in my chair, clutching the letter like it was a burning coal. The tears came then, hot, angry, not just for what was done, but for how long I had believed their lie, that I was broken, that I was a mistake, that I was a burden. I wasn't sick. I was betrayed. I didn't sleep that night. I stared at the ceiling, the letter under my pillow. I kept hearing my father's voice at Thanksgiving. "You've been a burden we've carried for 17 years. And now I knew the truth. They hadn't carried me. They had sold me. The next morning I woke with one purpose pulsing through every nerve in my body. I had to know, not wonder, not guess. I had to uncover the truth. That letter wasn't just a message, it was a key. And now that the door had been cracked open, I couldn't look away. I started with the little I had my memory. I grabbed my old notebook, flipped past pages of drawings and poetry, and began listing everything I remembered about the day I was taken to that gray building. The cold metal table, the white light, the man's name, Dr. Whitner. That name stuck with me like a splinter. I wrote it down and underlined it 3 times. I also wrote down the strange envelopes I'd seen in my father's study. Gene Farm Solutions, BRC Medical Holdings. I didn't know what they were, but I knew they were connected. I asked Denise at the center if I could use the computer in the office. She nodded, her eyes full of quiet concern. I searched for Dr. Whitner. Dozens of results came up most irrelevant, but buried on the 3rd page of results was a reference to a Dr. Marvin Whitner who had once worked with a now-defunct pharmaceutical testing company called Gene Farm Solutions. A link led to a 10-year-old article about a lawsuit filed by the family of a deceased child in Kentucky. The article was short, vague, and mentioned that charges were dismissed due to lack of evidence. But it named the same doctor, the same company. My blood went cold. I printed the article and taped it inside my notebook. Next, I contacted the old hospital where I had been taken after my legs gave out. I called and asked if they had records from 15 years ago. They told me I needed to come in person. I used a bus pass from the center and made the trip. The receptionist was kind but wary. After verifying my identity, she brought me a slim folder. "That's all we have," she said. I opened it right there. Inside was a 1-page summary. It confirmed what I remembered: paralysis of unknown origin. But then I saw something else. A single line at the bottom. Patient referred by external medical consultant Dr. M. Whitner. My hands shook. I asked the receptionist if they had any more records from that facility. She shook her head. That clinic shut down a long time ago. No forwarding information, no archive access. They just vanished. I returned to the support center with the folder in my lap, my chest burning. Piece by piece, the truth was assembling itself like broken glass rearranging into a blade. I knew I needed more. I had to go back to where it began. Riverwood, the neighborhood where we used to live. I asked Denise if there was a way to get there. She made a few calls and found a community transport volunteer willing to take me. The next morning, I rode through familiar streets. Nothing had changed. The houses were still sagging. The smell of oil and metal still lingered in the air. I passed by our old apartment building. The windows were new, but the stairs still creaked. I stopped at the porch of an elderly woman I remembered, Mrs. Carson. She used to babysit me when my mom worked double shifts. I introduced myself. Her eyes lit up with recognition and sadness. "Olivia, my goodness. I always wondered what happened to you." I asked her if she remembered the day my parents took me for that so-called checkup. Her eyes darkened. "I remember your mother was crying when they came back. She didn't speak to anyone for days. And then suddenly they had money. They moved out not long after. Everyone thought it was strange." I hesitated, then pulled out the letter and showed her. She read it slowly, her lips trembling. "Olivia, you're not the only one. I remember 2 other kids from the block who vanished that same year. Their families said they moved, but no one ever saw them again." I felt like the air had been sucked out of the world. I asked her if she remembered where the clinic was. She nodded. It was off the main road past the industrial park. A big gray building with no windows. Looked more like a warehouse than a clinic. We used to whisper about it. People said strange trucks came and went at night. I thanked her and returned to the van, my mind reeling. Back at the support center, I mapped the address. The building was still there according to satellite view, but abandoned. I needed to go. The next day, the transport volunteer took me. As we pulled up, my heart dropped. It was the same place. The heavy steel door, the crumbling facade. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years. I wheeled closer, peering through a cracked window. Inside was nothing but dust and broken furniture. But I recognized it. The hallway. The room. It was real. I hadn't imagined it. My trauma had a location. I picked up a piece of scrap paper from the floor near the entrance. Faded blue print read, "Gene Farm, Intake Batch 045. That was all I needed. I took it, held it close, and knew I wasn't done. Not yet. I returned to the support center with that piece of paper clenched in my hand like a lifeline. It was proof. Faded, dusty, fragile, but proof nonetheless. I now had enough to take the next step, and I knew exactly who to contact. A few weeks earlier, I had found the name of a human rights attorney during my online searches. Lauren Mendez. She had taken on pharmaceutical companies before and won. I sent her an email detailing everything. The folder from the hospital, the article on Gene Farm, the letter, the building, the list of observations I had been compiling for weeks. I didn't expect her to reply, but 2 days later, she did. I met her in a plain office in downtown Columbus, the walls lined with books and framed court verdicts. She was in her early 40s, wore glasses that made her look sterner than she really was, and had a voice that didn't shake. After listening to my entire story, she sat back and said, "Olivia, this case is big, bigger than you know. But it's dangerous. Are you ready to pursue it?" I didn't hesitate. I have to. It's not just for me. It's for the others. She nodded slowly. "Then let's begin." We started by building the case file. Lauren helped me organize all my notes, medical records printouts, and the scrap of Gene Farm paper. But we needed more victims, more stories, more witnesses. I remembered the letter. My child was one too. Somewhere out there was another parent who had lost a child to the same nightmare. I created a private online group reaching out on forums related to medical malpractice whistleblower support and disability survivor networks. Within weeks, I had responses. Angela, a mother from St. Louis, whose son Jacob had gone to a similar clinic in 2009 and never walked again. David, whose twin brother died unexpectedly after a drug trial he never consented to. Emily, who now lived on a ventilator after a research study her parents had enrolled her in, tricked by the same false promises. All our stories connected, the same time period, the same company, the same lies. Lauren began gathering formal testimonies. Angela's voice shook when she described how a woman named Helen, that was my mother, approached her in a grocery store offering help to get medical access for free. Emily's mother cried when she realized she had been deceived by smiling strangers in lab coats. The more we collected, the clearer the picture became. Gene Farm was running illegal trials using children, especially from poor families, as their test subjects. They paid brokers, parents, people like mine. My parents weren't just passive participants. They had recruited others. They were part of the machine. That was the final crack in whatever image of them I had left. They hadn't just sold me. They had become traffickers. Lauren filed a class action lawsuit in federal court on behalf of 8 named victims, including me. The defendants were Gene Farm Solutions and my parents, Bruce and Helen Hart. News spread fast. The media caught wind of the case. Headlines flooded in. Daughter sues parents and pharma company for human testing scheme. Olivia Hart exposes secret child experiments. At the trial, I saw my parents again for the first time since I left. They looked smaller somehow. My mother avoided my gaze. My father stared at me like I was a stranger. In court, they denied everything. My father said, "She's making this up to ruin us." She always resented Lucas. My mother cried and called me confused, but Lauren didn't blink. She presented the documents I had copied from their study, the bank transfers labeled Subject O, the list of children, the intake sheet from the abandoned building. One by one, the other victims testified. David, Emily, Angela. Each voice added weight. Each story mirrored my own. When it was my turn, I wheeled to the witness stand and told them everything. The Thanksgiving dinner, the clinic, the betrayal. And then I said I was never a burden. I was a child, and they sold me. The courtroom was silent. Even the judge looked shaken. The verdict came a week later. Guilty. Bruce and Helen Hart were convicted of human trafficking conspiracy and child endangerment. They were sentenced to 40 years. Gene Farm was ordered to pay restitution to every victim, and its executives faced criminal trials of their own. I didn't cheer. I didn't cry. I just breathed. For the first time in years, I breathed. 10 years have passed since the verdict. I am still Olivia Hart. I still live in Columbus. I still move through life in a wheelchair that squeaks if I turn too sharply. But I no longer carry silence in my chest. I no longer lower my eyes when someone asks about my family. I speak. I share. I survive. With the compensation I received from the trial, I founded an organization called Truth in Trials. We offer legal support therapy and shelter for victims of illegal medical experimentation. We visit schools and community centers. We write, we speak, we fight. I'm not the face of tragedy anymore. I'm a voice they couldn't silence. Every week, I return to the same support center that once took me in with no questions asked. I volunteer now. I sit with young girls who don't know how to say what hurts. I listen to old men who think their story is over. I tell them mine. I tell them about the clinic, about the needles, about Thanksgiving, about how the people who were supposed to love me left scars instead. I tell them what I learned, that family is not defined by blood, that love cannot be bought, that truth always finds a way to rise. One afternoon, a young girl who had lost her leg in a car accident whispered to me, "If you can live through that, maybe I can too." I smiled and said, "You can, and you will, because you are not broken. You are not a burden." I say it now the way I needed someone to say it to me years ago. And every time I speak those words, a little part of me heals. I lost my legs, but I found something stronger. I found my voice, and they will never take it from me again.